Live from the MacGyver Project Studios in sunny, warm Wisconsin, it's Nick with the Outstanding Authors Podcast. My guest today is Marty Sklar, author of a new book called One Little Spark. To say that Marty is a big deal in the world of Disney is an understatement. In fact, I doubt that there's anyone alive today whose Disney career has had more impact than Marty Sklar. He started working at Disneyland right before the park opened in 1955, and he's the only Disney employee who was present and involved with the opening of all 11 Disney theme parks throughout the world. He wrote copy for Walt Disney himself, and he held numerous leadership positions, including the president of Imagineering, the group that designs everything in the theme parks. He wrote his first book in 2013 called Dream It, Do It, and his latest book, which came out in September, is called One Little Spark. In the first half of the book, he reveals what he calls his Mickey's 10 Commandments, a guideline for Imagineers. For example, the first commandment is know your audience. For each commandment, he gives an example from Disney history where the commandment was successfully followed, and one example where it was not successfully followed. In the second half of the book, he provides feedback and advice that he solicited from around 75 Imagineers as to what qualities make a good Imagineer and how someone can become an Imagineer. This podcast is a special one because my dad is on the line with me. We used to go on family vacations to Disney World when I was a kid, and he has run the Disney College program at his school for over 25 years and has worked with over 500 students. In fact, he was actually just down there a few weeks ago visiting his students, and he happened to see Marty at a book signing. My dad was glad to get a chance to talk with Marty on the podcast, and I was really glad to have him be a part of it. So with that, let's give Marty a call.
Hello.
Hi, Marty. Hi, this is Nick. Hey, thanks for your time today.
Okay, I'm going to put you on my speaker. If that doesn't work, let me know. Okay?
Great, sure, thank you. So I'm Nick, and my father, Walter, is also on the line with us.
Hello.
Hello, Walter.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, in fact, my dad said that he actually just ran into you at Disney Springs a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that's correct. It was back in November, right?
Right.
Did you have a good visit, Walter?
I did. I'm involved with a Disney College program, so I had about a dozen students who I was visiting in Florida when I was there in mid-November. So I've been in charge of the Disney College program for about 27 years.
Yeah, so today we wanted to just talk to you about your new book, One Little Spark, and also ask you some general questions about some various Disney-related topics. So I guess my first question is, where did you get the idea to write this book?
Well, it really came from going around the country talking about the first book I wrote, my Dream It, Do It memoir that I wrote. And, everywhere I went, I would have parents and grandparents and, best of all, young people come up to me and say, how do I become an Imagineer? And I certainly didn't want people to think that there's only one path to any creative endeavor. And so I decided to enlist as many Imagineers as I could get to write something because that would give us a diversity that different approaches, different ways people are prepared to be in a creative enterprise. And eventually I sent the note out, which the note appears in the book. I sent the note out to about 125 Imagineers, and to my pleasure and a little bit of astonishment, I got 75 responses of people who have written something. And so then I had to figure out how to put it all together in the book, and the result is what One Little Spark is all about.
Yeah, the second part of the book really does speak to that diversity because there are so many paths that the different Imagineers have taken and so many observations that the different Imagineers share with the reading public. So it's a nice collaboration. It supports the whole concept of collaborative effort on the part of the Imagineers. So often you say it's not one person; it's the collaborative effort that matters.
Well, I always preached to the Imagineers when I was leading the creative group that there's only one name on the door. That's Walt Disney to this day, and I think that's a great advantage that we have as an organization, because you're not going to get your name in lights, and you have to be part of a team. And the entertainment business, everything is done really basically as a team. Whether you're working on a script or whether you're engineering something, everything is a collaborative process. And I think that's the first thing that people have to get used to and accept. And once they do that, they will find that what comes out of a group experience like that, a group ever, is much stronger than what any one person.
Okay. In your acknowledgments in the front of the book, you talk about the importance of music as a vehicle for people remembering the attraction and the movie. And I'm curious about when a song is removed, and one of the songs that you mentioned is "Listen to the Land," which was the original the original theme for the boat ride in the land pavilion. And when things shifted from Kraft to Nestle's, that song disappeared. Does that sadden you when a song that you really like and you associate it with the pavilion it just disappears?
Well, that particular one, absolutely. And I have subsequently tried on a number of occasions to get the Imagineering staff to find a way to get that song back in, because I do think it represents exactly what we were trying to do in the pavilion, and it gave a very strong continuity and message that people could take away from it. And I've heard many people say to me, "We sure miss that song." And in fact, I have at some of my presentations, I had Mike Iwerks at Walt Disney Imagineering put together a medley of the original songs that we had in Epcot. It runs about 4.5 or 5 minutes, and it really is a beautiful compilation. And the messages are so strong. And Bob and Dick Sherman did some, and there were 2 or 3 of them that were done. Randy Bright did one for the American Adventure. They're very, very strong story communication, and I miss some of them. It's particularly "Listen to the Land."
Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm one of those people who would love to see it come back. So if there's anything, if you know anybody, I've always wanted that song to come back.
Well, I know that they're doing some thinking about what the future attractions are for Epcot, and that's one of the things that I've sent a note to the people who are doing it, reminding them that this was a song. And I mean, it would be very easy to use at the end of the boat ride right now.
Right.
And with your book, or actually before the book, how did you originally come up with the idea to do the Mickey's 10 Commandments?
Well, that goes back a long way.
Yeah.
When Epcot opened, I've got so many requests from conventions and from museums and from corporations to talk about how Disney does things. And so I developed what I call Mickey's 10 Commandments. And 10 of them are in this book. There's actually 40 commandments now, because I then subsequently did 2 different presentations about leadership, which I made as the second and third of the 10 Commandments, if you will. And then I finally did one on followership, how to support your leaders and of the whole collaborative idea. And so I always joke a little bit that Moses only had 10 commandments, but I've actually got 40.
In the section of the book where you talk about keeping it up and maintaining it, you mention Trinidad Louise as a really good cast member who was involved with Custodial, and I just wanted to share this story with you. Most of what we're discussing is going to come from you, but I had a student in 1994, in the spring of '94, who was on a college program, and her first name was Tara, and Tara she's a farm girl because I live in the farm area of Pennsylvania near Allentown. She was very proud of being the first female to be allowed to take the honey bucket down Main Street behind the horses. And she wore that as a real badge of pride because she felt that it was very discriminatory for women not to be able to do that. So that small step of success for females, much like the Jungle Cruise when it first started, I think there were only male skippers, and now there are male and female skippers. But Tara really had no problems, having grown up on a farm, being a custodial hostess, and during the parade following the horses down Main Street she referred to as the honey bucket, doing the honey bucket. So I wanted to tell you about that young lady who was a little bit of a groundbreaker. So.
Well, I'm sure she took great pride in what she was doing too, as Trinidad did, and that was one of the things that really impressed me, is that he understood that he was on stage and that he was really became a star in many different ways because people wanted to take his picture. It was that throwback look that he had in his all-white uniform, and I'm sure the young lady you're talking about is the same thing. And it gets back, Walter, to what we were talking about, that diversity, that society has changed tremendously since Disneyland opened 60 years ago, and that kind of opportunity for young women is one of the more important things that have happened from a diversity standpoint in the world, and certainly at Disney.
I rewatched on YouTube the CBS special, October 23rd, 1983, hosted by 82, I'm sorry, hosted by Danny Kaye, and that was where Roy Clark actually sang on the boat, but one of the small segments on that was Alex Haley was on, and he had a model of Equatorial Africa, and he actually said during the broadcast, this pavilion should be opening sometime within a year or a year and a half. What happened to the Equatorial Africa Pavilion? I know there's an African section. When you pass China and you're going towards Germany, there is still an area where they have different exhibits, but the Equatorial Africa Pavilion never materialized. Is that because of sponsorship or something else?
Oh, yeah. We made pitches and developed ideas to intrigue a lot of different countries. Switzerland, I'm thinking of just off the top of my head, Switzerland, Australia, the Pacific Island idea that we had, African pavilion. Africa was certainly one of the pavilions. We had some wonderful illustrations that Herb Ryman did. Herb Ryman, of course, did the first overall illustration of Disneyland and Walt Disney World, for that matter. And he did some beautiful renderings that we used to promote the idea of the picture. And we had the good fortune of having Alex Haley work with us at that time. And we had a really good idea for a pavilion, but we could never get anybody to sponsor it. And in the World Showcase area, that, of course, is one of the things that is necessary, is to find the funds from either a country, as in the case of Morocco, for example, or sponsors, corporations from the country involved, which is most of the World Showcase. has companies from those countries that are the sponsors, but we can never find enough sponsorship from African nations.
Just as a follow-up to the Herb Ryman reference, Nick's mom, my wife, Elizabeth, is always moved when we go to the American Venture. There's a painting in there called Promise of America, which Herb Ryman was responsible for, and it's very moving. It's got the Statue of Liberty in the distance and immigrants on the shore. And he must have been a very talented individual to be able to produce so many sketches and just concepts, and even that painting. He must have been a very special person.
Well, he was the best, and Walt had 2 or 3 favorites, and Herbie was one of them. And we have, after Herbie died, there were 6 of us, including Sharon Disney Lund, one of Walt's daughters, and my wife and I, and Buzz Price and Ann Price, and Herb Ryman's sister. We formed an art program in Los Angeles, Southern California, called Ryman Arts 25 years ago, to honor not only Herbie as a quintessential Disney artist, but also he was a motivator, and he spent time with young people, teaching them, including Imagineers, but anybody that he found that really wanted to know how to draw. He was a graduate of the Chicago Art Institute, and he had a very strong opinion that an artist could do anything as long as you learned how to draw first. And this program that we've now got put 7,000 or 8,000 young people, high school age, through this program, all free of charge since we started 25 years ago. Now we're on 2 campuses, Otis College of Art and Cal State Fullerton. On weekends, they give us the classrooms, and every weekend, right now, we have about 350 kids from all over Southern California participating in a program named for Herbert Ryman.
Okay.
And I have a question about Fort Wilderness. When I was a kid, we used to stay there, and we would swim in river country. And I was wondering if you were involved at all in the development of Fort Wilderness or river country, and just if you had any stories or any background on that.
Well, I have a lot of memories when we were building Epcot. That's where we stayed. In fact, we had,
right.
Because they have some rental trailers there. And
that's where we stayed, Jackrabbit Run, the 800 loop. So.
Yeah, I know. Well, I must say that in those days I was jogging quite a bit, and it was a little scary to go jog in that area in the early morning before the sun came up, because there's so many animals in that area still. But anyway, the Fort Wilderness is a wonderful environment, I think, and of course the great show in the restaurant there that has been playing there, the Hoop-de-Doo show. Mm-hmm. That's been there since the beginning, is one of the most popular things at Walt Disney World. And I think that's wonderful to have that kind of access by boat and by bus to all the areas of Walt Disney World from your own trailer.
And do you know if anything is going to happen with River Country? Like, my dad said he heard a rumor that they were going to build the Disney Vacation Club there.
I don't really know.
Okay.
You know, what's amazing at Walt Disney World today is understand that there are 35,000 different kinds of places that you can stay at Walt Disney World, meaning hotel rooms, vacation club, camp, Fort Wilderness campground, etc. 35,000.
It's incredible.
Amazing.
In 2002, the stockholders meeting for for Disney, and my family are all stockholders, but they met in Philadelphia, and when I say stockholders, we're not big time stockholders, a few hundred shares, but I went to the meeting, and that was the meeting where Michael Eisner, there was an open feud between Stanley Gold, Roy Disney, and Michael Eisner, and I guess a few years later, Michael Eisner resigned as CEO and his spot on the board. Do you have any thoughts on those two? I know Roy Disney was instrumental in getting Michael Eisner and Frank Wells to come to the company from ABC Paramount, but over the years, obviously, they had a falling out. Do you have any thoughts on either of those two personalities, Michael Eisner or Roy Disney? That's obviously Walt's nephew, not his brother. Any thoughts on that? Because they were both instrumental in doing great things for the company, but obviously there was a falling out.
Well, you're absolutely right. It was Roy Disney and Stanley Gold that got Michael Eisner and Frank Wells to come to the company in the first place. And, you know, the first 10 years before Frank Wells passed away were really magic. And if you look at that period with all the great animation films, Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King, wow, that was a fantastic period for the company, and also in the park business. After all, we built the studio, we built Paris, we expanded Disneyland, and Michael built so many hotels with name architects. So that was a really rich period in the company. I think things changed, obviously, after Frank Wells passed away, and it wasn't the same kind of relationship over time. But, you know, both of those people were immense contributors to the Walt Disney Company, the growth under Eisner and Wells, and Roy's strength of rebuilding the animation organization. That was a very, very rich period creatively and economically for the company. I wouldn't denigrate either one of them. There were great periods, and sometimes people stopped getting along for whatever reason. But if you look at the record that both of them had in the company, it's pretty astounding.
Okay, thank you.
And in your book, you talk a lot about the guest experience, and I was wondering, I was just in Disney World in September, which is normally like one of the most uncrowded times, but I was kind of surprised just how really crowded it was, and I was curious if Disney, that you know of, is doing anything specifically to improve the guest experience where overcrowding is concerned.
Well, I think they've done quite a bit. If you look at the whole My Magic program, where they made all those bracelets so that you can access the restaurant, make reservations, a whole bunch of different things to try to alleviate the fact that there's a lot of people coming. You know, I remember the first Christmas season at Walt Disney World, and it was so crowded. And I was there, and I started talking to people, and I said, why don't you come in January instead of during the Christmas season? And they say, hey, our kids are out of school, and we can bring the family here. So it's pretty hard to say what is the best time and what is not the best time to go to Walt Disney World, for example, or Disneyland, for that matter, or any of the parks around the world. But there's a lot being done continually to try to make the guest experience easier, to make it possible for people to make reservations in advance, and a whole slew of things that have changed that to make it easier for guests who are coming to the park, whatever time of year you come.
I agree. I think it just, when I see the changes for the positive, for it to everything from line management to it's just terrific as from my perspective. But I have a sort of a different train of thought here. Just a couple more questions. How close did Disney's America in that Washington D.C., Virginia, Maryland area did it come close to fruition, or was it dead on arrival? Or I remember that time when there was some enthusiasm for the park in the D.C. area, and it never happened.
Well, unfortunately, in retrospect, it probably was dead on arrival because of the people from the horse country, if you will, in that area who did not want their environment to be changed and have a whole bunch of tourists coming through continually. So from that standpoint, I think it probably, in retrospect, it was. I remember being on the site with Michael Eisner and Bob Weiss, who is now responsible for the Shanghai project, as a matter of fact, and he was going to be the Imagineer in charge of that. And we were really excited about the potential of the site and to talk stories about America, which I think are badly needed, to talk about the kinds of things that we were going to do in that park. And also, I think the whole experience of visiting Washington could use a lot of help from the standpoint of people who know how to handle large numbers of people and to move them around. So we were all disappointed that it didn't happen. But in retrospect, there were a lot of people who lived in that area and didn't want their environment, and they made sure that it didn't.
Okay, and I'll go back even further now. When I was in high school, I visited the New York World's Fair well over a dozen times, and had wonderful memories from everything from eating a Belgian waffle to seeing the Pietà and the Vatican Pavilion. But the four Disney pavilions, It's a Small World for Pepsi and the Ford Pavilion and GE Carousel of Progress, and of course great moments with Mr. Lincoln, the Illinois Pavilion, were my absolute favorites. That must have been an exciting time for Walt too, because he was still alive, and he must have been really energized. Do you have any? Were you involved in that? And do you have any thoughts about the New York World's Fair?
Oh yeah, that was why Walt brought me up from Disneyland to work originally on the Ford Pavilion, and then I worked on a number of things in the carousel, the GE Pavilion, Progress Land it was called, and some on It's a Small World. So yeah, that was my big step from being a publicist to all of a sudden being part of the creative team. And it was a great experience, and Walt was so smart about that. And we didn't even quite understand it at first, but he kept taking on these projects like It's a Small World 11 months before the fair opened, and it seemed impossible in many ways, but we all jumped in. But the big thing was that he owned everything in those pavilions that related to Disney, and all of it came back to Disneyland. And so when it came back to Disneyland in 65, 66, 67, it expanded Disneyland tremendously. Carousel Progress opened in Disneyland in 1967. The dinosaurs from Ford in 1966 on the railroad tracks. Lincoln Show actually opened in 65 while it was still playing in New York. And, of course, It's a Small World. It's a Small World came back from the World's Fair, lock, stock, and barrel, including the water trough, everything, and opened in Disneyland in 1966. So it was a huge expansion of Disneyland that was paid for by these other companies while Walt was being what Look magazine called the giant of the fair, which he actually was. And the other thing that happened was, and this nobody seems to be aware of this at the time, but the first piece of land in Orlando was purchased almost the same month that the World's Fair opened, 1964. So Walt was already planning, once he had the land, what he was going to do at Walt Disney World.
Okay. Nick, do you have any other questions?
No, I don't. Thank you very much, Marty, for your time. It was a lot of fun.
Yes, we enjoyed it, and we enjoy all of your and your sensitivity to responding to letters. I actually wrote to you probably 25 years ago with a question, and you wrote back. It was long before email days, and I'm very impressed with your concern for guest experience, and we both wish you good health and a continued long life inside or outside of Disney.
Well, thank you, and keep up the good work on the college program. It's really a good way to get somebody's feet wet in the business, isn't it?
It really is, and I've made a friend in Dan Cockrell, who's, I know you know his father Lee, and he started on the college.
Well, too, they're terrific.
Yeah, I saw Dan when I was there in November, and he's a good example of people who start off, and of course John Lasseter, who started on the Jungle Cruise, Steve Martin. There's a whole collection of people who start in the parks at the lowest level and work their way up. Yeah,
Steve Martin, in one of his books about his live performances, has quite a bit about Disneyland in the early days.
Okay. Well, again, best wishes for a healthy 2016, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you both, and the same to you, the family.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
All right, bye. So thanks very much to Marty for talking to us, and thanks to my dad for being a part of it too. That was a ton of fun. There's no limit on the subjects to talk about with Marty. He's seen it all, and we could have peppered him with questions for hours on end. I like what he said about the Listen to the Land boat ride song, and maybe someday the Imagineers in charge of the pavilion will listen. I'll get into a little more in a future blog post, but there's absolutely no reason that song couldn't easily be re-added to the opening section. You wouldn't have to change the song at all, and you could keep the ride as Living with the Land. But I digress. Once again, the book is called One Little Spark, so go out and read it and buy it today. And as always, if you have any questions or comments for me, feel free to contact me at sweeto37@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Project MacGyver and read my blog at themacgyverproject.blogspot.com. Thank you.